Well, hello and welcome back to Elevate Ordinary. I'm your host, JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi.
And we're back with another extraordinary conversation about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty in all those ordinary parts of life, marriage and family and work and all that stuff on the playground, everywhere else. Yes.
Our producer just played a Pam Beasley on us, where Teresa started out the intro to this episode last time crazy. And it didn't work well. And an accident happened and he's like, can you do that intro again? And then we did the intro again and I was calm and I said my name correctly and I did everything right, just like Pam Beasley would do to Michael Scott. She'd do the practice run.
Isn't that great?
And here I messed it up again. We're gonna have to do it again.
I don't know. Should we?
Okay. No.
One more time?
No. No, today we're talking about courtesy.
Yeah, we're going to talk, courtesy, manners, that kind of stuff. Pretty ordinary, actually extremely, extraordinarily ordinary. There tend to be things that we, especially as a modern society, we just don't think matter. In fact, it's one of those things, it's kind of like any sort of ritual or tradition these days. When we see somebody taking it seriously, our instant thought sometimes is, are they just trying to draw attention to themselves, trying to make themselves look superior? Or if we imagine ourselves, paying attention to, traditional manners and acts of courtesy, that I can only imagine myself doing that if I was trying to draw attention to myself or look cool or whatever.
There's a movie, Blast from the Past, that I really like. And at one point a character says, I used to think manners were like a way of feeling all superior to people or showing other people that you're superior to them. But then Adam, the main character, who's from the 60s, it's a long story. Good movie, not for kids. He says that Adam told him that manners were a way of showing the people around them that you have respect for them.
Yeah. So
that's my catechism.
Love it.
Blast from the Past catechism definition of manners.
Yeah. And that we'll break that open a little bit as we talk. But particularly what I wanted to think about today of courtesy and manners as the ways that we practice the presence of other people. And then I want to connect that to our practicing of the presence of God in prayer. And I think what we'll see is that there's a lot of connections there. And if we're struggling with one, it may be that we're not doing the other. And particularly, I think from the direction of human to prayer, or our relationship with humans and our relation to God in prayer, in that we often maybe struggle to sit still in prayer, to be in the presence of God. But then what we maybe recognize, if we turn around and ask the question, do I really practice the presence of other people? And so I was thinking about this a couple months ago, I think, when I wrote down some notes for it. I was thinking in our family life, family life is messy. We talk about that all the time. So messy, so loud, so noisy. Mm-hmm. We're always trying to practice patience, get better at reacting or not reacting, all that kind of stuff. But one thing I noticed one day was that as I was trying to wrestle and manage my emotions and the kids and all that kind of stuff, whatever, I was recognizing, for whatever reason, that I hadn't been practicing basic courtesy. So kids come into the room, I'm busy with my thoughts. I don't say hello. I don't look them in the eye. I don't acknowledge them. I might tell my kids to say please and thank you and all this kind of stuff gruffly. But how often am I omitting saying please and thank you and excuse me? If I'm moving past them in the kitchen, am I saying excuse me? Little acts of courtesy. And I was recognizing how ideally I'd want to be a person who does that. Ideally, I'd tell my kids and teach them to be the kind of people who did that out there in scenarios perhaps where they're a reflection of me and my parenting. But how often I fail to do those things in our home, in the messiness of family life. And I was thinking then further, reflecting on that, how when we do those things, part of what we're practicing is the presence of these other people and our recognition of their personhood, right? I mean, actually, I was thinking of this more in relation to the last couple of years with COVID and masks and all this kind of stuff, and how it's only exacerbated how easy it is for me as a slightly introverted person at times to go into a store and to take my items and put them on the conveyor belt and only give the most bare, basic recognition of the other person with a couple grunts and pay for my stuff and leave. And they're usually pretty satisfied with that too. I mean, a lot of the times. But how easy it is for me to just treat people as simply objects in the scenery. Like I'll acknowledge them if they're smiling at me, or they're cheerful, or I feel like it, or it's useful to me. But if I don't feel like it, or neither of us feel like it, I'll just kind of not even think about the fact that this is another real person. And how often we pass people in the street, we pass people in the store, we interact with people as if they're just other objects in the scenery, and not something very unique, something very distinct from the rest of the scene. And then obviously how, to my chagrin, how easy that is even in family life to begin to only transactionally and conditionally show courtesy when I feel like it, when it's useful, but not as a intentional, proactive practice of seeing and acknowledging this person's personhood and their dignity. Thoughts so far?
I have too many.
One of them, for example.
Well, no, I don't think that they make any sense to our podcast. I'm trying to envision being an introvert, and I'm like failing.
That's what you were thinking of.
I'm just trying to like fit this into my daily life, because so I do ignore. I've noticed I ignore our kids. I ignore them. Like, let's just be honest about that. And part of it, I think, is, sorry, there was something in my face. I swatted it away. Part of it is obviously because I have some level of ADHD where I'm always getting distracted into other things. But another part is that sometimes it's easier for me as an extrovert to not get drawn into other people, because I will. Like, we were joking about this the other day, how you were saying like you could ignore someone if they came in the room, or like I have to actually give myself the presence of being, like give that person my attention, where it's like, it feels really different as an extrovert, because you almost notice every single person that enters the room, and it's like a big balloon of your excitement.
Yeah.
And it becomes hard to pay attention to the person who you were paying attention to. And I think like phones and computers really exacerbate that. Like, I'm somebody who, I have high levels of stress when I even look at my computer screen to turn on our colored lights in the evening, our red light in the evening, so that it's not messing with our circadian rhythms. And like, to even look at my screen when anything else is around stresses me out. And so I'm trying to like fit this into for extroverts. But it becomes difficult for me to pay attention to the children when I'm doing almost anything else, because I get too drawn into them, and I like burn the stuff on the stove, or I'm trying not to burn the stuff on the stove. And I know if I turn my attention to them, I'll forget that anything even exists. Right. We have this problem with school in our house, where if the kids aren't 100% honest with me with what they're supposed to be doing in the morning, whether it be chores or school, like, I'll forget about it completely, because a baby ran outside naked and I have to chase him down or something. So help me with this. Okay. How do I practice the presence of God when I'm continuously drawn other places? Right. So it's not for me an issue of coming out of myself. It's an issue of like honing in, practicing being present to other people and to God, because now, well, I'll let you say what you're going to say first, but I want to talk a little bit about my struggles as a mom.
Well, let me connect to the practice of God, because I think, on the other end of that, I think we'll have maybe some more insights to use in our analysis here. As you said, I do want to connect. Part of what I was thinking about with all this is the connection occurred in my mind of our practicing of the presence of other people through basic courtesy. In other words, whether or not we feel like it, the ways that we show, acknowledge the dignity of another person, that they're a person amongst objects. They're not just an object in the scenery. They're a person. And the ways that we show them respect. There's a connection between our practice of doing that, I think, and our ability in prayer to practice the presence of God. So there's this bit in the Catechism, in the section on Christian prayer. This is paragraph 2565. I won't read the whole paragraph here, but it says about halfway through that paragraph, thus the life of prayer is the habit of being in the presence of the thrice holy God and in communion with him. And there's a lot going on there before it, the context, but a couple times I've read this, I've been drawn to this phrase of the practicing of the habit prayer is the habit of being in the presence of the thrice holy God. It's interesting phraseology there, right? Because it's not just that I go into the presence of God, I just start praying. It's that's a habit that has to be formed, right? It's being in someone else's presence takes work. And there might be from different reasons. I mean, you started to bring this up, I think, with the thinking about maybe the different struggles that introverts and extroverts have, or different types of personalities. For an introvert, a more introverted person, it might be more that you just would rather not have to turn out and focus on other people because it's intense, because it takes your energy. Whereas for the extrovert, maybe it's more that, focusing on one person at a time might be the difficulty, because you just want to, be into all kinds of things. And we'll talk more about those. But the point is that every person has to practice the habit of being in someone else's presence. And there's lots of context. We had a conversation early on in this podcast, about conversation about conversation, right? And I remember us talking about, when you're having a real conversation with somebody else, are you listening just thinking about your next point, or are you really listening to them, expecting to learn something, wanting to learn something? And there's a lot of different ways you can be in conversation with another person, rightly or wrongly. Mm-hmm. When you're in conversation with them, it takes practice to be a person who really is open to them, who really actually listens, who really allows their mind to be changed by new information. In other words, to practice the reality of that person. They're not just a talking box. They're not just my interlocutor that I'm going to get my next point to. They're not just someone to listen to me. They are a real person. And am I listening in such a way? Have I practiced listening in such a way that I'm acknowledging their personhood? And so this notion of the habit of being in the presence of God or of another person is just something I was thinking about in connection to, again, and my reason for connecting to courtesy is that sometimes we are relating to another person in terms of like a deep conversation, mm-hmm. but most of the time we're not. Most of the time, 98% of our daily interactions with people are not, deep quality time, as we might say. Mm-hmm. It's quantity time. It's just all the normal day-to-day, the ordinary interactions. Mm-hmm. And courtesy and manners are this way that humans have established the practice of being in the presence of other human beings, so that we're not becoming jaded to them. We're not becoming numb to the reality of their personhood. We're actually intentionally practicing it. We're constantly reminding ourselves that, when a lady walks in the room, or really anyone, I should pay attention to them, stand up, greet them, acknowledge them, or whatever it is. There's different scenarios, different situations. But the point is, am I practicing the presence of another person, the reality of their dignity, the reality of their personhood? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I used to clean the church.
Yeah.
Which was like super awkward, because you would be, Jesus is there in the tabernacle, and in a way, like it's nice to be there by yourself and like vacuuming and sweeping and scrubbing and cleaning and serving in that kind of way. Mm-hmm. But in another way, when you're vacuuming the center aisle and you're continuously crossing in front of the tabernacle, right, you have this feeling of like, well, Jesus understands. I genuflected once. It's fine. Right. But then another part of you is like it's scrupulous to be like, every time I pull the vacuum back this way, genuflect, pull the vacuum back this way. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so I began to have this, because I didn't want to not acknowledge him there. I wanted him to be like another worker in my space, like another human being in my space, because he is. But then I started this, I didn't want to genuflect every time, because it took a lot of time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it was a little scrupulous. So instead, what I would do is that when I would cross that center aisle, because that was the courtesy, that was the norm mm-hmm. of how in our church we express the presence, the personhood of Jesus there in the tabernacle, I would bow from my heart first. Mm. So it was like Jesus knows my heart, and he I didn't have to bow, mm-hmm. but my heart was bowing. My heart was acknowledging him. Yeah. And I found that is very helpful in the actual practice of being in church. Yeah. Anyway, like when you go to genuflect, you see kids when they're learning to genuflect, it's like this quick, like, they're kind of sort of, I did the thing, but it, like when I go and genuflect now, even if I'm pregnant and I can't actually get my knee to the ground, or I'm carrying a couple children and I can't do anything like bow my head, the practice, the habit of recognizing Jesus with my heart and like almost feeling my heart bow is what it is. And you know what? God bless the people who judge me for not getting down to my knee, but that's an extra grace for me.
Babe, that's so perfect. Right? That's so perfect for this topic. Because again, I think there are people who fall into two erring extremes there. There are people who, you express this, that, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to genuflect the whole time, whatever. So de-emphasizing the acts of courtesy, in this case, we might call them piety. It's courtesy to other people. It's piety to God. We make that distinction. But the other extreme is sort of a scrupulosity. In other words, like worrying, thinking of these things as mere kind of cold duties, and if I do it wrong, God's going to be angry, or like I have to do the right formula, and that's not right either. Again, I think the key is thinking of God as a person. Even that exercise of thinking if you're walking around a room, and we're not thinking of God, if we're thinking about a person sitting there. Well, again, hopefully we would, if we're walking around a room vacuuming or whatever, and there's another person in the room, we would have acknowledged them when they came in. And even though we don't keep acknowledging them over and over necessarily, we stay aware of the fact that there's another person, that the person doesn't stop being a person just because I've done my duty. I waved at them, they're done. They're not a person anymore. They're just an object of the scenery. So that internal awareness, again, of there's another person here, and I remain attentive to them. If they're another human being, I remain attentive to their needs. I'm ready to notice if something changes, if they need something, because that's a person. They're not just a chair or an object or a table. That's a person. And so with God, it's not just another human person, but a divine person. The King is there. And so again, I might genuflect on my way in. And even if, again, it's not practical or necessary to genuflect over and over and over again every time I cross the center line of the church, the point is I remain attentive to the reality of that person and who they are and who I am in relation to them.
So what's coming to my mind right now, and I hope that I'm able to paint this picture very well, but I'm thinking of the variety of priests that we've worked with or been in closer to. Okay. And what I mean by that is you would have some occasions of being within a small group in a church with a particular priest. Okay. Yeah. We've been with that. Teresa, stop. Okay. So, seeing the priest have to leave and do some business real quick, turn to the tabernacle, look at Jesus in the tabernacle. And no matter how rushed he is getting out, he is turning his attention, bending that knee and looking at him, as opposed to, maybe just being in church and kind of people watching, which I'm not suggesting that you do. It's a near occasion of sin, but just kind of genuflecting with your eyes kind of going all different directions, which I do all the time because I'm always watching kids, or hyper aware of where all the kids are, and what all the potentials for danger for other people are at the hands of my children. Where I'm distracted. I know Jesus is there, but I'm distracted when I'm genuflecting. It really is just like emotion. Yeah. You know what I mean? Whereas I'm imagining these priests, no matter how frustrated they are to leave the church, I gotta do this. We forgot this thing. I need to bring it back. Turning the body towards our Lord in the same way you kind of would to your spouse, you can be frustrated and angry in front of your spouse, right, and not be frustrated and angry at them. You know what I mean? It's hard to do.
You wouldn't just turn to leave without acknowledging them.
That
would just, you just wouldn't do that unless things are really bad, and then you'd walk, then you get out of the house and be like, I just did a bad thing. That's. So I was thinking about this in a number of different ways. One, I was thinking of it again personally and how my practice or failure to practice of courtesy and manners, my acknowledgement, my practice of another person's presence, every person I come in contact with, that's connected to my ability to be in presence of God in prayer and to acknowledge him. And if I'm struggling with that, maybe it's because I'm not practicing it here. Maybe that's because I I can only maybe commit so much time to prayer each day, but I'm constantly in walking near people. And so if the sum total of my life is 98% of the time I practice not paying attention to people, just treating them like the scenery, and then I expect to be able to sit down and give God attention for more than a few microseconds before I'm distracted, there's a connection there. There's also a connection, though, we think of as parents, is like, I want my kids to come to know God. And when I'm in church, I do believe that it's important for us as parents and for other parents, for us adults to carry out the pieties that our children see, so they see it. But what if we emphasize to our children, to fold your hands and to genuflect and acknowledge God and pay attention to him, but then what they're not getting is a healthy dose of our practicing of their presence? In other words, is there a conflict between our examples?
Well, do they know how to pay attention?
Right.
Because we've never shown them how to pay attention to another person.
Or do we not do it enough with them? We want them to pay attention, but again, the most common way that we practice showing attention and showing respect is through courtesy, but we often just kind of shuffle that off or dismiss it because it's not important. But again, I guess part of the case I'm making here is that I think it's another reason why humans in history have developed these little practices, these little ways of showing presence and respect. It's a way of constantly practicing the most important reality, which is that I'm a person, you're a person, and we're in relationship, some relationship.
Yeah, and it's impossible it's impossible unless you're very bad, you're doing a very bad action, to turn your attention to another person and really be in their presence, and either to not love or pity them.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's easy to imagine yourself turning your presence to a child you're angry at and really being present to them and just being like, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, you're just a kid. Or to turn your attention while you're freaking out back to your spouse and just being like, yeah, everything will be okay. But then like somebody who's done something really bad to you, or snubbed you or cut you off or said something mean to you when you're walking by. Like if you're able to turn your attention to that person, it's really possible to pity them.
Yeah.
And rather than see them as a them, that those jerky XYZ persons who I hate. There's just another example of those jerky XYZ persons that I hate, but when you really turn your attention to that person, like they were a kid once, right? They were a baby once, and I've got a baby at home. And
this is a really, really good point. This is actually where I wanted to go next with this, is thinking about all the little ways that we slip from what we'll call it personification, maybe, acknowledging the personhood of somebody, to objectification. Now we've often heard that in our Catholic, spiritual, circles, theological circles, in terms of virtues and vices connected to sexual stuff like chastity and purity. We think of objectification. We're thinking of the way that society uses women and their bodies. The objectification. But I think there's a much wider application that includes that. But there's just, again, all the little ways that we treat people, again, as just objects in the scenery. And you were giving some examples there, all of the ways that we turn from we get distracted from the personhood of the person to what they did or what they're doing or how they're making us feel or what we're going to do next. There are all kinds of things around us, mentally, theoretically, that we end up focusing on, but being distracted from the one thing needful, the one thing most important, which is the personhood of the person. They are a person. You're a person. And that happens in all kinds of circumstances. I mean, again, lust is a great example of that, right? When somebody looks at a bit of pornography, they are, I don't know if it was Christopher West who originated this phrase, but pornography doesn't show more, it shows less. It doesn't reveal more, it actually conceals. Pornography conceals the personhood of the woman or the man in the pornography. It conceals their personhood and only shows the body part or the action or whatever. And this is a much broader issue as humans, that we're always having to fight this movement to objectify people, to only see them as a body part or as a function or what they can do for me or how they're affecting me or how they're making me feel. All these other things other than No, that is a person. That is a child of God, a son of God, a daughter of God. And that's the most important reality. Everything else is peripheral to that reality, that person is a child of God, precious, cherished, and chosen.
Yeah, it also helps you practice the present moment, because there's just something about like looking into another person's face and being there and being vulnerable. Like even just for an instant. I mean, you don't have to be doing anything else, but just like it kind of takes the wind out of all your sails. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, and you feel like, I almost feel like when I do turn my attention to another person, when I'm in kind of like a crazy scenario where I'm like worried about a lot of things, or I'm able to almost like take a deep breath, and then creativity comes back, and I'm able to like make the right decision or do the right thing.
I think it's a Martha Mary thing, but go ahead and keep going.
Well, there was a movie that I don't recommend unless you're using VidAngel that we watched recently, called Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh yeah, it's a crazy movie.
It was a crazy movie, but I wasn't quite sure where it was going, but the end was
interesting.
The end was like, it gave me a lot to reflect on, because it's Everything Everywhere All at Once is a commentary on the nature of women and what we're always thinking about all the time.
You heard it here, folks, and I didn't say it.
What?
Yeah, sorry. Just everything everywhere all the time is a
yeah. Well, but the end is that recognizing this other woman as a person.
Yeah.
And resting. That's what it brings. It brings rest. When you recognize that the other person is present, it almost takes all of the pressure off of you.
Right.
You're present and you're at rest.
Yeah.
And it allows you to be creative. But now that I'm thinking about being in the presence of Jesus, the more time you spend in front of the tabernacle, I found this out in college, I believed that Jesus was present in the Eucharist at the point that I started frequenting the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. I believed it intellectually. I had my conversion, but the more that I sat, the more that the person sitting there, I don't want to say manifested because that's got a bunch of baggage, but like he was really there. It was another person like staring at me and just being.
Yeah. I
mean, obviously no real spoken words exchanged, lots of internal words on my end, but also on his, and then when we got married and had kids, things became jarring again, right? Like in church, you're just like, my baby made a peep. Oh no, like I'm disrupting the liturgy. And now like if my baby made a peep, that's excellent because I've got kids like spitting and kicking and asking, when is it going to be over? And this person looks like this. Mommy, why do they look like that? Like there's a million other things I could have been embarrassed about, but I started to get distracted and afraid. And I notice now that like when I go to the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, I have to sit for a good long time fighting off continuous distractions because I'm not in the habit anymore of being in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, but having little children, you're like, it's like rapid fire emergencies all the time. Yeah. And it's hard to be present to rapid fire emergencies all the time.
So I want to go back, and I think this connects to that. I want to go back to, you were talking about looking at people in the eye. And I think there are lots of reasons here why we often avoid that, right? Like I'm walking through the store and I'm trying not to see people's eyes. Now, sometimes on the surface level, we just don't want to be awkward. But I think on a deeper level, in even more common situations, like to look someone in the eye, it's again, I connected it, I was thinking in my mind to the Martha Mary thing. We know that if we actually take a moment and look at another person's eye, part of what we're confronted with is the reality that that other people are more important than things or my other concerns or the stuff or what I want to do.
Out about at the moment.
God's action and his reality is more important than me being in control of the situation. So we think about Martha and Mary. I mean, Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus. She's recognizing that there's nothing more important than being in the presence of God and being open to him and letting him act. It's even more important than what I want to do, which is to go manage the situation and control things and control reality. And that's often the struggle that we have. Even so in prayer, when we want to sit down, part of the internal conversion that has to happen is I have to be convinced that it really is that Christ was right when he said that Mary was doing the one thing needful, that I really can let go for a moment of control of events and scenarios and all the things I'm worrying about. I can really let go and submit to God and be open to God and just listen to him, because it really will be okay. Mm-hmm. And this really is more important than that. We're always wrestling with that in prayer. Like we see that dynamic all the time, but I think we have the same thing with other people where there's a part of me that feels like I should pay attention to this person, but I want to keep hold of all these thoughts and all these concerns and all these other things, whatever. And to actually look in this person's eyes confronts me with the reality that none of that is as important as this other person. Mm-hmm. Sorry, you talk for a moment. I'm going to recover my composure here. Making myself tear up over here. Go ahead.
What do you want me to talk?
I guess you could just stare in my eyes for
I was practicing the presence of another person.
Doing such a good job.
I wasn't allowing the thoughts to continue.
Well, here, I'll help us both regain composure by reading a C.S. Lewis quote. That always helps.
There you go.
A great quote from C.S. Lewis's sermon called "The Weight of Glory." He gave that sermon at one point at some place. At some church. I don't know the backstory. I just know it was a sermon.
I just know it's
The Weight of Glory. And he says, it may be possible for each to think too much of his own potential glory hereafter. It is hardly possible for him to think too often or too deeply about that of his neighbor. The load or weight or burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it, and the backs of the proud will be broken. It is in light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and the circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, these are all mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses. The weight of glory. The weight of your neighbor's glory. I read the full long quote because it's just so utterly, devastatingly good. But again, to connect it back to the topic of this episode, courtesy and manners, all these little things, these seemingly ordinary things are how we practice trying to get back to a recognition of the reality of the weight, the immense weight of our neighbor's glory, potential glory. Dang, man. Sorry, I got to process over here for a moment. And again, I think other human beings, like the saints, one of the ways that they function in our spiritual life is through other people, through coming to recognize and appreciate and practice, by the practice of their glory, seeing them as children of God, seeing God working in them, seeing their beauty, just really seeing them, that helps to elevate our appreciation of God's glory. When you get to know a saint, you get to know them, and you learn their life, and you meditate on them, and you see their goodness and their truth and their beauty, and you see that all comes from God, and that everything that they have is a pale image of God's glory. Well, then your image of God gets elevated so much further, right?
Yeah, it really helps you to be able to trust and let go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to keep talking about this because it's just so good, but we probably should wrap it up here. In summary, right, I think a preeminently ordinary aspect of life is, manners and courtesy, please and thank you, and looking another person in the eye and giving them a firm handshake, as we're trying to teach our kids to do, acknowledging someone when they come into the room, standing up, smiling and talking to the cashier, rather than just checking out. I think those are all so ordinary. But what I'm proposing here is that they're important because what we're doing is we're practicing the presence of other people, the reality of the other person, their personhood. Yeah.
So yeah, just to bring this all back to Jane Austen. I've often found the most edifying examples of manners in Mr. Knightley in Emma and what's her name? Eleanor Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility.
Yeah.
Because I think when people think of the Regency era and Jane Austen, they think everything is about manners and manners.
And everything is about surface appearances.
But,
and she does a good job of getting into people's heads and showing, no, that some people use these simply manipulatively, but there's not supposed to be, and the good people in the story precisely go through these from a heart of appreciating the personhood. Sorry, keep going.
No, I mean, like, I don't think there are very many people in Jane Austen's novels that actually exemplify true manners for the actual purpose. And what I was saying is the only two people that I can really think of who do are Mr. Knightley and Eleanor Dashwood. So I guess that's all I had. That's all I had.
Well, we'll have to do more episodes on that, because that is part of the drama of her whole books, is seeing, because you're seeing inside another person.
Elliot.
You're seeing the interplay between their words and their actions, their mores and manners, and their internal life. And yeah, you're precisely seeing in lots and lots of characters a real conflict. Even some of them aren't, they are not well bred, as they would say in the novels, and they don't exemplify the manners, but many do. But it's in conflict with their inner motivations and how they really regard people. And then there's a few characters that they really operate in concert, that those things really are an expression precisely of virtue and how they regard other people. So, in summary, what I'm proposing is that all those are important for that purpose, is that they can be a way, if we acknowledge them, if we grab onto them, the way that we take the innumerable little daily interactions with people and we use those to practice this preeminent reality of personhood. But there's also a connection between whether or not we practice that well and our ability then to go into the presence of the divine person, of God, in prayer, whether it's in our home or whether when we go into the chapel, our ability to acknowledge God there, to pay attention to God there, to remain present to him, to not merely go through the pious motions of genuflection or folding our hands, but to do those as an expression of our recognition of God. There's a connection between all those. Again, that's one of the consequences of the doctrine of virtue, is that there are just no insignificant actions. There are simply human actions. And if the sum total of your human actions, if 98 or 99% of those, you're not acknowledging the personhood of people around you, then you're going to find, and that it's going to be more and more difficult in that to do that. Whereas if we embrace more of those actions and say, no, every time I'm in the presence of another person, there are the little acts of courtesy, are ways I'm practicing the reality of that person's personhood. It contributes to our relationships, our prayer. It's one of these ordinary things that we just miss, and it's just so precious. It's so powerful, the weight of our neighbor's glory. Okay, now I'm really done. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Elevate Ordinary. Hopefully there was something thought-provoking in there. We'd love to know what you think. I think this is a good topic where I would love for people to sound off. How have you found this true in your life? What are some unexpected ways in which you have found to practice the presence of other people, the presence of God? This is, I think, a topic where we can help each other to recognize maybe little opportunities that we're missing to practice this, to enter into it. And again, there's no distinction between the practice and the performance. It's the same thing. When we practice it, we're also doing the one thing needful. And when I'm practicing paying attention to my wife and looking in her eyes, I'm not just practicing it, I'm doing it. I'm building the relationship there and now. So every action is important. So again, this is Elevate Ordinary, extraordinary conversations about the ordinary pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. We thank you for joining us for this episode, and we'll talk to you again soon. God bless.